Hi, welcome back. I'm Jaxon from Animal Encounters, and today I'll be going over 6 criminals who were eaten alive by dangerous animals, from a midnight hippo attack on a Burundian waterway to a lethal leopard encounter in the forests of Zimbabwe. Let's start our story in Indonesian Borneo, where an illegal gold miner wading into a river at dusk had no idea what was waiting just beneath the surface. It was August 9th, 2016, when the Mahakam River's upper tributaries had receded to their lowest levels in years, exposing sandbars and gravel deposits rich with alluvial gold along the banks of eastern Borneo. The Indonesian government had declared the region off-limits to unlicensed mining, but enforcement in the remote interior was virtually non-existent. Illegal miners had been working the tributaries for months, using mercury amalgamation to extract gold from river sediment, a process that poisoned the waterways and drove wildlife into unpredictable patterns along the shrinking channels. Ridwan Hasanuddin, a 43-year-old former plantation laborer from a coastal village in East Kalimantan, had been running an unlicensed dredging operation on a narrow tributary for approximately 6 weeks. The work paid roughly 10 times what plantation labor offered. He had established a crude camp on a muddy bank roughly 15 miles upriver from the nearest village, accessible only by boat. His sole companion was Taufik Raharjo, a 31-year-old laborer who handled the dredge, while Hasanuddin managed the mercury processing. The two men worked from dawn until the afternoon heat became unbearable, then resumed in the early evening. The evening routine included washing equipment in the shallows before securing the camp for the night. What stays with me about this setup is how routine it had become. 6 weeks of wading into that same stretch of river every evening, and nothing had ever happened. That kind of repetition doesn't build safety, it just erodes caution. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with large males in Borneo's river systems capable of exceeding 15 feet, though most are smaller. These apex predators are opportunistic ambush hunters, relying on concealment and explosive acceleration to seize prey at the water's edge. Their attack involves a sudden lunge, clamping the victim in jaws possessing among the strongest bite forces ever recorded in any animal, then dragging the prey into deeper water where drowning becomes the primary cause of death. A death roll may or may not occur, depending on the circumstances. Attacks are more common during low-light periods, making dusk and dawn the most dangerous times along tropical waterways. According to the account Raharjo later provided to investigators, the evening had been unremarkable. Hasanuddin had entered the shallows as the light was fading, wading to roughly knee depth to rinse sediment from the dredge components. Raharjo was on the bank, approximately 20 feet away, sorting equipment. The attack came without warning. A large crocodile lunged from the murky water, its jaws clamping around Hasanuddin's torso with tremendous force. Raharjo described an explosive surge of water and a single brief cry before Hasanuddin was dragged beneath the surface. The disturbance lasted only seconds before the river settled back into stillness, 20 feet away. That's the part I can't shake. Raharjo was close enough to hear every second of it, and absolutely powerless to change anything. Raharjo remained on the bank until morning, then navigated downstream to alert the nearest village. A search party reached the site 2 days later. Partial remains were recovered approximately 300 yards downstream, cached along a submerged root system and showing signs of decomposition and aquatic scavenging. Investigators documented the illegal mining operation and identified Hasanuddin through personal effects at the camp. The Wildlife Authority noted that mercury contamination from illegal mining may have altered prey distribution along the tributary, though no proven link to attacks exists. What I keep circling back to is the irony. The same illegal operation that poisoned the river's ecosystem may have increased the number of encounters at the water's edge, exactly where crocodiles already take prey opportunistically. Borneo's rivers had swallowed a miner in seconds, and I keep thinking about how that stretch of water looked exactly the same the morning after as it had every morning before. The next story carries that same invisible danger, except this time the predator didn't ambush from the water. It stalked through the mangroves on 4 legs. It was April 17th, 2014, when the tidal channels of the Sundarbans mangrove forest along the Bangladesh coast were at their most treacherous. The shifting water levels transformed the landscape hourly, flooding pathways that had been dry minutes earlier and exposing mudflats that sucked at boots and slowed movement to a crawl. Visibility through the dense mangrove canopy rarely exceeded 30 feet, and the humidity hung thick enough to muffle sound. The air carried the smell of salt and decomposing vegetation. Nurul Howlader, a 37-year-old fisherman from a village on the forest's northern fringe, had supplemented his income for years by hunting spotted deer illegally within the protected reserve. The bushmeat trade along the Sundarbans border was small but persistent, with deer meat fetching reliable prices at village markets where enforcement officers rarely appeared. Howlader knew the northern channels well enough to evade the occasional ranger patrol, but declining deer populations near the forest edge had forced him progressively deeper into unfamiliar territory. Accompanying him was Shahidul Talukder, a 29-year-old neighbor who had joined Howlader on 3 previous expeditions. The two men entered the forest before dawn by wooden boat, navigating a network of tidal creeks until they reached a section of elevated mudflat where deer tracks were abundant. They pulled the boat onto the bank and proceeded on foot, carrying a single-shot rifle and butchering tools. The thing that unsettles me most about the Sundarbans is the visibility. 30 feet in any direction, mangrove roots chest high, mud pulling at your ankles. You could be standing 10 meters from a 400-pound predator and never know it until it decided you would. Bengal tigers in the Sundarbans represent a unique population with a notably higher incidence of human predation compared to tiger populations elsewhere. The combination of dense mangrove cover, limited visibility, tidal terrain that restricts human mobility, and a combination of environmental pressures and frequent human overlap creates conditions where tigers encounter and occasionally hunt humans. Adult males typically weigh between 220 and 480 pounds, with many individuals smaller than mainland populations, and their ambush strategy is devastatingly effective in the mangrove environment. Most attacks come from behind, with the tiger targeting the neck to achieve rapid incapacitation through trauma and asphyxiation. Victims in the Sundarbans are frequently dragged into dense vegetation or water channels following an attack, consistent with the species' instinct to move prey into secure cover. Talukder would later tell investigators that the two men had separated by approximately 40 yards as they moved along a narrow trail through chest-high mangrove roots. Howlader was ahead, navigating a section where the trail curved around a tidal pool. Talukder heard a single, abrupt sound, something between a shout and a grunt, followed by the heavy crash of movement through vegetation. By the time he reached the curve, there was nothing visible except disturbed mud, scattered equipment, and drag marks leading into the dense mangrove thicket toward a water channel. One sound. That's all Talukder heard. Not a struggle, not a fight, a single noise, and then drag marks. I don't think most people understand how fast it ends when a tiger commits from behind in terrain like this. Talukder fled to the boat and returned to the village. He did not report the incident for 2 days, fearing prosecution for poaching. When he eventually led forest rangers to the area, they recovered partial remains approximately 100 yards from the trail, dragged into a shallow tidal channel and partially concealed beneath root structures. Paw prints and drag evidence confirmed a tiger attack. The remains were identified through personal effects and later confirmed by family members. The Forest Department documented the incident as consistent with the pattern of tiger predation unique to the region. Talukder was charged with illegal entry into the protected reserve and unlicensed hunting. 2 days before, he reported it. I keep coming back to that detail, the fear of prosecution outweighing the urgency of what had just happened. It tells you something about the desperation driving these men into the reserve in the first place. The Sundarbans had swallowed one poacher into its mangrove darkness, and from what I've read about this region, most of the people taken are never found at all. But the next story moves from silent ambush to brute territorial force, where a smuggler's midnight shortcut through a hippo channel ended exactly how anyone familiar with these animals would expect. It was July 23, 2017, and the shallow channels feeding Lake Tanganyika along Burundi's western border had shrunk to a fraction of their wet season volume. The dry season heat had baked the surrounding floodplain into cracked earth, and the receding water concentrated large groups of hippopotamus into crowded pools and reed-choked channels, with dominant males defending diminishing territory against anything that entered. Bosco Nyongabo, a 44-year-old trader from a lakeside village, had spent years moving contraband across the Burundian-Congolese border by boat. The route was simple but dangerous, a nighttime crossing through shallow channels that connected to the lake's deeper waters, avoiding the few border patrol boats that operated during daylight hours. The goods varied by season, ranging from illegally harvested charcoal to electronics and clothing purchased cheaply in the Congo. Nyongabo had made the crossing dozens of times over the previous 3 years without serious incident, using a flat-bottomed wooden pirogue that could navigate water as shallow as 18 inches. His partner for the crossing was Dieudonné Hakizimana, a 33-year-old laborer who served as second paddler and helped load cargo at the Congolese side. The two departed shortly after midnight, their pirogue loaded with bundles that left barely 6 inches of freeboard above the waterline. The plan was to follow the channel north through the reed beds, cross a wide, shallow section, and reach the Congolese landing point before dawn. 6 inches of freeboard on a wooden boat in Hippo water at midnight. Every part of that sentence makes me tense, and they'd been doing it for years. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous large animals, responsible for more human fatalities across the continent than most large animals. Adult males commonly weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds and are fiercely territorial, particularly during the dry season when shrinking water forces animals into tighter quarters. Their massive jaws can open to approximately 150 degrees, revealing canine teeth exceeding 16 inches and generate immense crushing force. Hippos are especially dangerous at night, when they move between aquatic resting areas and terrestrial grazing grounds. According to Hakizimana's account, the crossing had proceeded normally for approximately 40 minutes. The men were paddling through a narrow reed channel when they heard a deep, resonant grunt from the darkness ahead. The sound repeated, closer, followed by the heavy displacement of water. The hippo surfaced less than 15 feet from the bow. Nyongabo attempted to reverse the pirogue, but the loaded boat responded sluggishly. The animal lunged forward, its massive head striking the side of the pirogue with enough force to capsize the vessel instantly. Both men were thrown into shallow, uneven water amid their scattered cargo. Hakizimana scrambled toward the reed bank. Behind him, the hippo charged toward the disturbance in the water, Nyongabo, who was struggling to find footing. The animal's jaws clamped around his midsection with crushing force, lifting and tossing him aside. Hakizimana heard the impact from the reeds but could see almost nothing in the darkness. What followed was one or more violent impacts, then silence. The silence is the part that gets me, not the charge, not the capsize. The silence after, standing in the reeds in total darkness, listening to nothing, and knowing exactly what that nothing means. Hakizimana reached shore and remained hidden until dawn. He made his way to a fishing settlement approximately 2 miles south. Nyongabo's body was recovered later that morning by fishermen, floating in the shallows near the capsized pirogue, bearing injuries consistent with a hippo bite to the torso. Authorities recovered the scattered contraband and arrested Hakizimana. The incident was documented as a territorial hippo encounter in a restricted waterway during peak dry season. A midnight smuggling run had ended in silence on a Burundian waterway, and every time I read about hippo encounters in shallow channels at night, the outcome follows the same brutal pattern. But the next story shifts from tropical water to frozen river country, where a poacher walked into the one encounter that even experienced outdoorsmen rarely survive. A mother bear with cubs at close range. It was September 28, 2015. And the rivers of Kamchatka Peninsula teemed with spawning sockeye. The annual migration drew among the highest concentrations of brown bears on Earth into the river corridors, where the animals fed relentlessly in preparation for hibernation. Gennady Vostrikov, a 45-year-old former commercial fisherman based in Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, had operated an illegal caviar harvesting operation along remote river systems for several years. The collapse of regulated fishing quotas had devastated the local economy, and black market caviar offered income that legitimate work could not approach. A single good day of harvesting could yield several kilograms of salmon roe worth thousands of dollars to middlemen who shipped the product to buyers across East Asia. His partner was Arkady Chesnikov, a 38-year-old mechanic who handled logistics and transport. The two men had established a temporary camp along a remote tributary, approximately 30 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by an aging all-terrain vehicle that Chesnikov maintained. Their method was straightforward: net the spawning salmon, harvest the roe, discard the fish, and transport the processed caviar to a contact in the city. Brown bears are among the most powerful terrestrial predators in the northern hemisphere, with adults on Kamchatka commonly exceeding 800 pounds and occasionally surpassing 1,200 pounds during peak autumn weight. Their muscular structure enables devastating blunt force strikes with their forelimbs, and their claws, measuring up to 4 inches, can inflict deep lacerations with a single swipe. Defensive encounters involve overwhelming physical force and repeated mauling rather than a single killing blow. During hyperphagia, bear density along salmon rivers reaches extraordinary levels, and females with cubs become particularly dangerous when surprised at close range. The most dangerous encounters occur at very close range, where the bear's response is immediate and overwhelming. Vostrikov had been working the riverbank alone that morning while Chesnikov processed roe at camp roughly 500 yards upstream. The thick riverside brush, a tangle of alder and willow that grew to head height along the banks, severely restricted visibility. Vostrikov pushed through a dense section where the trail curved around a gravel bar. To me, this is the scenario that every bear safety guide describes as the worst case. Head height brush, no line of sight, a river full of salmon, and a man walking alone with no noise discipline because he didn't want anyone hearing him in the first place. The illegal nature of the operation eliminated every precaution that might have saved his life. Based on scene evidence and Chesnikov's account, the encounter was sudden and at extremely close range. A female brown bear with 2 cubs had been feeding on salmon carcasses in the shallows, just beyond the brush line. Track evidence suggested the distance was approximately 15 meters or less. Chesnikov heard a single shout, followed by violent commotion, crashing brush, and a brief vocalization that ceased abruptly. He retreated immediately, taking the vehicle back toward the road. He returned the following morning with 2 other men from a nearby settlement. They found Vostrikov's body approximately 30 yards from the encounter site, bearing injuries consistent with a severe defensive mauling. Blunt force trauma and bite wounds were concentrated on the head and upper body. Evidence was ambiguous regarding whether the bear had fed on the remains afterward. He drove away, left his partner on that riverbank, and drove 30 miles to the road. I'm not judging the decision, but the fact that he came back the next morning instead of sending authorities tells you everything about the position these men had put themselves in. Chesnikov reported the death to authorities, and the investigation revealed the illegal caviar operation through equipment recovered at camp. Conservation officers noted the attack was consistent, with a defensive response by a female surprised at close range with cubs. The Kamchatka wilderness had killed a poacher whose need for silence placed him exactly where these encounters happen, and I keep turning that over. But the next story is different. No witnesses, no partner, no sounds, just a stranded drug runner, dark water, and a single bite no one saw. It was May 11th, 2013, and the Caribbean coast of Honduras lay dark under heavy cloud cover. The stretch of coastline between La Teiba and Trujillo was known among local law enforcement as a corridor for small-scale drug transport, with runners using fast boats to move product between remote landing points under cover of darkness. The coastline was sparsely populated along this stretch, with few lights visible from offshore. Bayron Uceda, a 34-year-old from a fishing village east of La Ceiba, had been running drugs along the coast for approximately 2 years. The work was dangerous, but enormously profitable compared to the subsistence fishing that sustained most families in the region. Uceda operated alone, using a small fiberglass panga with an outboard motor, moving between predetermined drop points along a stretch of coast where the Aguan River emptied into the Caribbean. The river mouth created a zone of murky, sediment-rich water that extended several hundred yards offshore, a convergence of fresh and salt water that attracted marine life into the shallows. Bull sharks are considered among the most dangerous shark species to humans due to their preference for shallow, warm coastal waters where human encounters are most likely. Adults commonly reach 8 feet in length and weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. Bull sharks are frequently found in river mouths and estuarine environments where freshwater mixes with saltwater, creating the murky, low-visibility conditions they favor. They possess a powerful bite capable of severing major arteries, and their serrated teeth are designed to shear through flesh and tissue. Most attacks involve a single bite, followed by immediate disengagement, though the resulting trauma and blood loss can prove fatal if the victim is unable to reach medical assistance in time. What happened that night was pieced together entirely from physical evidence. Investigators believe Usida's motor failed approximately 300 yards offshore near the river mouth. The panga was found drifting the following morning by commercial fishermen, its motor locked in a failed position and a quantity of narcotics still secured beneath a tarp in the hull. Usida's personal effects, including shoes, a handheld radio, and a small amount of cash, remained aboard. The boat showed no signs of struggle or foul play. This is the detail that tells the whole story for me. His radio was still on the boat. A drug runner stranded 300 yards from shore who couldn't call anyone. Not the Coast Guard, not a friend, not his contact, because every option meant exposure. Based on the scene evidence, investigators considered several scenarios: that Usida had entered the water voluntarily to swim for shore, attempted an engine repair, or fallen overboard. The exact circumstances remain unknown. A stranded drug runner could not radio for help without exposing himself and could not remain drifting past dawn. Usida's body was found the following morning by commercial fishermen, washed into the shallows and likely carried there by coastal currents. The remains bore a single large wound to the upper right thigh, consistent with a large shark, likely a bull shark given the location, that had likely damaged a major artery. The wound pattern was consistent with a single bite and disengagement. Based on the location of the body relative to the boat, investigators believe Usida bled out in the water, unable to reach shore before losing consciousness. The proximity to the river mouth placed the attack within known bull shark habitat. No witnesses, no struggle anyone could describe, just a body in the shallows and a drifting boat with drugs still under the tarp. It's the quietest story in this episode, and somehow that makes it the one that lingers with me the most. The Caribbean had quietly claimed a lone drug runner, and the stillness of that scene stays with me in a way the louder stories don't. But the final story is the most vicious, because in the forests of Zimbabwe, a poacher walked into a trap of his own making, and what waited inside was very much alive. It was July 14th, 2018, and the Miambo woodland along the Zimbabwe-Mozambique border had shed most of its canopy, leaving the forest floor exposed to low afternoon light. This stretch of border country served as a critical wildlife corridor, and it had become increasingly targeted by bushmeat poachers who laid wire snare lines along animal trails. Tapfumane Gumbo, a 39-year-old unemployed laborer from a rural settlement near Chipinge, had been running snare lines through the corridor for over a year. The wire snares were cheap to construct, requiring only brake cable salvaged from vehicles, and devastatingly effective. Set at choke points along game trails, the snares tightened around any animal that walked through, trapping it by the leg, neck, or torso. Gumbo's targets were primarily antelope and warthog, which he sold as bushmeat at local markets. The indiscriminate nature of wire snares meant they frequently caught non-target species, including predators. Wire snares are the detail I can't get past. They don't discriminate. They catch whatever walks through: antelope, hyena, leopard, and hold it there, alive, injured, and increasingly desperate. Every snare line is a lottery, and this time it paid out the worst possible result. Leopards are among Africa's most adaptable and powerful predators, with adult males weighing between 130 and 170 pounds, and possessing extraordinary strength relative to their size. Leopards are capable of hoisting prey heavier than themselves into trees and are known for their explosive, close-quarters speed. When cornered, injured, or restrained, leopards become extraordinarily dangerous, their response shifting from avoidance to violent defensive aggression. Their attack targets the throat and neck, and their claws, while shorter than those of larger cats, are razor-sharp and capable of inflicting deep lacerations. Leopards are solitary, elusive, and primarily nocturnal in areas with human pressure, making encounters rare but potentially devastating when the animal cannot flee. Based on evidence recovered by anti-poaching rangers, Gumbo had entered the corridor in the late afternoon to check his snare line, a route that stretched approximately 2 miles along a well-used game trail. He carried wire cutters, replacement cable, and a small machete. Rangers reconstructed the scene from physical evidence discovered 5 days later. One of Gumbo's snares, set at a natural choke point between 2 fallen trees, had caught a large leopard around the foreleg. The animal had partially freed itself, wrenching the snare anchor from the soft ground but remaining entangled in the wire, which was still wrapped tightly around its lower leg. Track evidence and ground disturbance indicated the leopard had been struggling for some time before Gumbo arrived. The area around the snare showed signs of prolonged thrashing, with deep claw marks gouged into the fallen timber and soil torn up in a wide radius. I keep trying to picture what that looked like from Gumbo's perspective, walking along his snare line, expecting a dead antelope, and instead finding a 150-pound leopard that was injured, partially free, and staring directly at him. The attack evidence began within several feet of the snare site. The leopard had reacted instantly when Gumbo approached, exploding from its position in a defensive burst. The ground disturbance suggested a brief, violent struggle. Claw marks and blood evidence indicated the leopard had inflicted severe injuries to the neck and upper body. The concentrated area of the struggle suggested rapid incapacitation. Rangers discovered Gumbo's remains approximately 20 yards from the snare, dragged into thick brush and concealed beneath fallen branches, consistent with either feeding behavior or post-attack handling. His machete was found near the snare, unused. Wire cutters and replacement cable confirmed his purpose in the corridor. The machete was right there, unused. That single detail tells me how fast this happened. He never even reached for it. The anti-poaching unit documented 23 active snares along the trail, several containing the decomposed remains of trapped animals, including 2 antelope and a juvenile hyena. The leopard was never located, though rangers noted blood evidence suggesting the animal remained injured from the snare wire. Wildlife authorities cited the incident as a direct consequence of indiscriminate snare poaching in critical wildlife corridors, noting that the same traps intended to catch prey had created the exact conditions for the fatal encounter.